provide tons of free content, free value. Give to the universe without any expectation of anything in return. Don't say, "Oh, I'll give you information about batteries, but you need to give me your email address first." Or, "I'll give you information about batteries as long as you buy something from me first." No, make it totally free. Give the universe something of value. And I'm a believer that when you give the universe something of value, that you will get something back in return. In this case, provide a whole bunch of great details about the product, service, idea, whatever that you sell, and bang, the more you provide, the more people who will want to do business with you. That's the basic idea of what we're talking about here.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ecommerce Traffic and Conversion Podcast. I'm Scott Branley. I'm here with my co-host DJ Sprague and our special guest today, David Meerman Scott. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We're super excited to have you, and I have the special opportunity to introduce you. David is a multifaceted genius with many interests and talents. To start with, he is a content strategy guru who's written a handbook on the subject of the new rules of marketing and PR, first published in 2007, now in its 14th revised edition in 30 languages. He's also authored 12 books in total, including 4 international bestsellers. He's a global keynote speaker, having addressed 42 countries on all 7 continents, and presented in the Business Mastery Program with Tony Robbins. And believe it or not, he has a home museum showcasing some of the best collections and artifacts from the Apollo lunar program in the world, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, that's cool.
He's also a global surfer, a massive music fan, and he's seen over 804 live shows, including 75 of the Grateful Dead alone to date. I hear you've got 6 more in the schedule. So that's going to go way over that. And if all that's not enough, for one mortal human being, he's also one of the first 20-something male models in Tokyo, specializing in the young businessman look.
That was a few years ago.
That was a couple years ago.
Yeah,
that's a lot for one human being.
Yeah, I don't like to be bored. I have to do new things, otherwise I get bored. So it's always looking for the next bit of excitement in my life. But it's great to be on, guys. It's exciting to be a part of this world that you're in, and e-commerce. It's people just put up their store and that's it. But that's not going to be as successful as the kind of ideas we'll be talking about in the next couple of minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And speaking of that, I wanted to share a little personal story that I had with the book and the concepts in the new rules of marketing and PR. So if I'm not mistaken, David, the first edition came out June 1st of 2007.
Sounds right. It was mid-2007, exactly.
All right. So there you go. I read it later that year, finished it in 2008. And in 2009, on my own blog, I gave you a shout out on a couple different blogs. And you, being the gentleman you are, said, "Hey, thanks for the shout out." And that's how you kind of got on my radar, quite honestly, back in 2009. And in 2010, I started with a SaaS company, a B2B SaaS company, and started using your principles. So we went from 0 to 19 people in the marketing team.
Nice.
We built out a fully integrated team. Thank you. It was literally nobody. And at the time, they're doing $7 million in sales. And we executed an integrated team with PR, advertising, marketing, content, events, etc. We created, because of your book, 4 primary buyer personas.
Okay.
And create a separate blog for each, because we wanted to make sure we're specifically addressing each buyer persona with their own language, linguistics, problems, needs, etc. And then, of course, white papers, articles, ebooks, guides, etc. followed for each persona. And we went all in on your concept of newsjacking. And we created original studies and content around trending news and topics that affected each persona. Cool. So we went from, in 2010, about 100 inbound leads a month to 2000, almost 14, 8,000 inbound leads a month. and we went from 7 million to 53 million in annual recurring revenue in slightly over 3 years.
Wow,
So
that's crazy.
honestly, that was because of this book and the principles and concepts. As you can see, it's well marked up. This is the 14th edition, came out in 2002. And I see it as the handbook to content strategy, inbound marketing. Of course, you're closely aligned with HubSpot. You have been for many years. And really following those strategies. And I, by the way, made that book mandatory reading for everybody in the marketing team. Everybody had to read the New Rules of Marketing PR because that was our playbook. Like we literally use that as a playbook. And well, the results speak for themselves. And
wow, that's great.
I'm super excited to have you here today.
Thank you for sharing. It warms my little heart when I hear that my ideas have helped people, because it's great that that the business grew from 7 million to what did you say, 54? Is that right? 53 million. I mean, that's amazing. But what I love about that and what I do for my work is that, and I'm not going to take the credit, you did it all, but maybe the ideas helped. And now there's more families that are being fed because there's more employees of your company. There's more people out there who are able to help their kids. And so I just love the idea of being able to help organizations and people to get their ideas out into the marketplace, to make more sales, to grow their business, because ultimately that helps them and it helps society. So what better way is there to live in this world than helping people? It's exciting for me. So thanks for telling that story. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, well said. That's a great way to package it all up in a nice bow, because it's so true. It helps people, families, individuals, companies, communities, when you're generating revenue and employing people and providing for their needs. That's a super positive thing. Just really exciting to be able to take concepts from a book and apply them in a daily environment, a true integrated strategy where you're using newsjacking and PR and inbound marketing and high quality content, hyper focused on specific personas, addressing their needs, problems, fears, desires, and getting them engaged in your brand and creating leads and sales and revenue at a hyper pace from 100 leads a month, inbound leads, to 8,000 is crazy. It's just crazy. So anyway,
that's awesome. Well done.
Yeah, that's a good testimonial right there, TJ.
There you go.
I've been waiting since 2010 to have you on the show. So
yeah, we waited a pretty long time.
14 years in the making.
14 years, yeah.
Well, normally we kick this off, David, by asking people how they got into their industry, but I'm actually more interested in the story behind the book, right? Because that book, it's a bestseller and it's helped a lot of companies. What was the idea or the impetus behind the book itself?
So back in the late 1990s and very, very early, the year 2000 and into 2001, I was working for a division of Thomson Reuters. It's actually now a division of Thomson Reuters. At the time, it was independent. And I was using these ideas that I talked about in the New Rules of Marketing and PR, using them to grow this business I was working in. But they were radical ideas, things like putting free content on the web, on a website, things like creating an email newsletter to generate interest. This was pre-social media, so we didn't have social media to use, but the idea that content drives action. And the company I was working for was acquired by Thomson Reuters, and the new bosses took a look at the kind of marketing I was doing, and I essentially got fired. And they did not see that this new form of marketing was something that they should implement. And that's cool. It was pretty new and radical at the time. So this was 2002. And I went out on my own to teach these ideas that I was using myself in the company that I was a vice president of marketing for. And it was working then for the companies that I started to do consulting work for. It's like, wow, this is working pretty great. And then in 2004, I started my blog. And that was pretty early to start a blog. It was 2004, 20 years ago. And that started to gain traction for me. And I was generating attention for my business using the ideas that I talked about. So I started writing the ideas that became the new rules of marketing and PR in 2004. Got the publishing deal in 2006. It came out in 2007. And as you know, because you've read it, it's a real story-driven book. So I think of an idea like, for example, having a blog is a great idea, but then I want to interview people who have done that, who have a blog, for example, and show their success. So I just made sure that I was constantly looking for examples of success. Too bad I didn't know about your success back in sort of 2012 or 13, something around there. Maybe you would have gotten into a new edition of the book, but I really wanted to make it story driven. And the first edition came out, as you said, June 2007. And it was an explosion of how quickly it took off. My publisher was super surprised. They had to keep going back to print more copies and more copies and more copies. And eventually we over the various editions have sold 500,000 copies in 29 different languages. But I think it's the idea that I had a new way of doing marketing. And I wrote it in a way that made it approachable because I was sharing examples of how people were successful. And then once a book about online marketing comes out, as you all know, because if you're watching or listening to this, you're probably doing e-commerce. Things are constantly changing in the online world. So I had to continue to update the new rules of marketing and PR, and have just finished the 9th edition, which is coming out in the summer of 2024, so soon, and always changing to make sure that the latest and greatest techniques are available in the copies of the book.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. So this one is about 433 pages. Is the new one going to be longer?
I do eliminate things too. So there's always things that change, and there's things, Twitter becomes X. So I have to do a search and replace the word Twitter for X. The last edition, I think it was Google Plus disappeared. So got to remove Google Plus. I'm constantly swapping out new stories. I may like a story, but there may be a more current one that's more appropriate, so I'll swap it out. This particular edition, although the current edition, the 8th edition, does have a chapter on artificial intelligence. The most recent edition needed to have a much bigger, more comprehensive chapter on artificial intelligence. So that's the biggest change in this particular edition, but it might be a couple. I forget what the page count ends up being for the new edition. It won't be much longer than that because I do eliminate content as well as add it.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, thank you for that. E-commerce. Okay, so how would you define a optimal or successful inbound content strategy using your principles for an average e-commerce brand? What would you recommend? How would you address that e-commerce executive to say, fundamentally, here are the things you need to think about?
So the way I look at the world is that you've got to give something away to get something. I mean, just in general, in the universe, if you want a friend, you got to be a friend. If you want to find a client, you need to give something away to help them to be interested in wanting to perhaps work with you. And if you want to sell something online, you have to provide something of value for people to want to get interested in you. Now, there are other ways to organize business. You can be the cheapest provider. That's a tough position to be in, because it's easy for another organization to undercut you by a little bit. You could, for example, go only the partner route and just always sell, say, through Amazon, and that's it. But if you're creating your own site and pushing your own stuff out there in your own way, hoping to keep the majority of your revenue, you're not doing the low-cost provider thing. In my opinion, one of the best ways to get out there and get noticed is to make sure that your website, your social media, the content you're putting out there, like you guys right now doing this podcast, for example, putting out the content that will be valuable for those people who might be interested in buying the product that you're offering on your e-commerce site. And I think that's true of anything. I really do. And I've seen it a lot recently because during the pandemic, the early on in the pandemic, I became obsessed with camper vans. And in October of 2020, I bought a super awesome tricked out Sprinter van, Mercedes-Benz Sprinter camper van.
Yeah.
And this sucker was expensive. It's awesome. And I for whatever reason, I don't know if it's my personality. I don't know what it is. My wife would say I'm crazy, but I'm always looking for modifications on the camper van, right? So I've put in a new electrical system. So it came with a good electrical system. It had 2 batteries. I could be off grid for a couple of days. But the new system I put in 4 batteries, it has a much better generator. There's a lot of new stuff in it. I mean, it's super awesome. And the company I used is called Roam Rig, and their products and services are sold via the e-commerce site. And they had the best content. They educated me on a topic I didn't know of. How in the world does an electrical system in a Mercedes Sprinter camper van work? I don't know, but I learned the basics on their website. The owner of the business, Aaron is constantly on the Facebook group that I'm a part of for camper van enthusiasts. And he's constantly educating people on the whole idea of how these battery systems work and how to optimize them and what the best approach is. So now I can be off grid using my battery system. I can be off grid for a full week, which is awesome. To be able to have electrical power off grid for a full week is amazing. And then I did the same thing with a water system. And then I did the same thing with other aspects of my camper van. So I'm constantly looking for what's the best way to accomplish this task. And I just go to the web, find the organization, the company that has the content that educates me, that informs me, that provides me with the information I need. And then I say, okay, if these people are smart enough to educate me, and they're in the forums and the chat rooms that I frequent, and they're the ones that are providing the advice, that's the company I want to do business with, even if there's a lower cost provider, even if I can buy, John Smith's cheapo camper van electrical system for, and by the way, it was $10,000 for this electrical system. And some other guy might have the same thing for $7,500. I'm going with the people I trust, the people who have educated me. I went with this company called Roam Rig. So that's my philosophy around how an e-commerce site can be successful, is provide tons of free content, free value. Give to the universe without any expectation of anything in return. Don't say, oh, I'll give you information about batteries, but you need to give me your email address first. Or I'll give you information about batteries as long as you buy something from me first. No, make it totally free. Give the universe something of value. And I'm a believer that when you give the universe something of value, that you will get something back in return. In this case, provide a whole bunch of great details about the product, service, idea, whatever that you sell. And bang, the more you provide, the more people who will want to do business with you. That's the basic idea of what we're talking about here.
So in your book, you literally say, stop looking at content creation as a marketing expense. Sounds like that's your explanation of why you said that. It's not an expense, it's an investment, and you have to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, very specifically around that concept is that There's many things that a company invests in that on a balance sheet is considered an investment. So, for example, if you build a new factory to make the product that you're going to sell, your accountants will, and I'm not an accountant. I'm the worst. I would be the worst accountant on the planet. So I'm not giving accounting advice here, but an accountant would say, okay, if we're building a factory, that's an investment for the future. That's not an expense we're making today. Yet, the vast majority of companies look at all of their marketing expenses as an expense for this year. Now, there are, of course, many marketing expenses that are expenses. If you spend money on advertising, let's say Google ads or Facebook ads or Instagram ads or whatever it is, that's an expense because you have to pay every single month. So if I'm doing a Google ad campaign and an Instagram ad campaign, I'm paying every single month for those ads. If I turn those ads off and stop paying next month, I have no advertising. And there's lots of businesses who rely on this approach to marketing, the advertising approach to marketing. Instagram ads, Facebook ads, perhaps even LinkedIn ads or Google ads or whatever it is. They're spending a lot of money. And they figured out that if I spend $10 on Google ads, I'm going to get $12 worth of e-commerce sales. That's a tough slog because you constantly have to feed that beast to make that extra $2. And there's lots of companies that might be able to optimize that mathematics better than you because they can scale higher or whatever. So constantly having to pay for ads can be tough. However, here's the difference. If I invest in either myself creating the content or hiring somebody to work in my organization to create the content, and one of the people I suggest is a journalist who's good at writing, a journalist who's good at video, a journalist who's good at creating interesting stories, whatever it might be. But however that content is created, it lives forever. If you have a podcast episode like we're recording right now, it lives forever. If you take the text transcript of this podcast episode that we're making right now and turn that into 25 tweets, those tweets live forever. If you take the podcast episode we're creating now and put it out as a companion blog on your e-commerce site, that lives forever. And if somebody's entering an obscure search term, they might find a blog post you wrote 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I started my blog 20 years ago. Looking at my Google Analytics, I sometimes see people who find me by searching on a topic that hits a blog post that I wrote 18, 19, even 20 years ago. So treating me and my writing ability as an expense is the wrong way to think about it. It's an investment because every time I create something new or every time you create something new, like this podcast episode, you're increasing the content that's out there that points back to you and what you're selling. And then you have an opportunity to drive people into your business in that way. And I see so many accountants and CFOs and business owners who only look at marketing as an ongoing monthly expense, which I think is a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. You've got to plant those seeds and then they harvest later. It's not, oh, we did this today, and if I don't see an ROI in 30 days, it didn't work. Yeah, I want to bring up because you said I would hire a journalist, and I forgot to tell you, but because of your book, I hired a journalist at that.
Wow, nice. Awesome. You did what we talked about. Yeah.
Literally did it. And she was amazing. She was a newspaper journalist for the local newspaper. And because of her insights and her way of looking at content creation, it was really great content. And of course, we hired other writers, et cetera. But that was one of the early hires, is literally hiring a journalist. I looked for them specifically, not just a content creator, but a journalist.
Right.
And there's a lot of power in that. So
and the difference, of course, is that there's lots of people who can write who are good at sort of the copywriting style of writing in the marketing world. They can create your advertising, they can write copy about the different products that you sell, and that's still important. But the idea of what a journalist can do, journalists are storytellers. Journalists are people who can look at different angles on the same topic. There's someone who can instinctually know, assuming they're good ones, instinctually know, oh, there's a story here. Oh, wow, here's the R&D department. Look at this cool thing they're doing. Or look at this interesting person who's an employee. And what they do on their off time. Maybe I should write a story about that. Or, the CEO is giving a speech at this particular event. Maybe I'll go and create a story around some aspect of that event and what the CEO is saying. And a journalist can do that. Marketers aren't as good at doing that. Marketers aren't good at that kind of writing. Or it doesn't have to be written journalism. It could be video-based journalism. There's other ways to create content from the perspective of journalism. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is creating the kind of content that people will be attracted to, that will generate interest, that will get Google search results, in a natural search engine results, and so on. So very, very important to be thinking about in terms of generating your content is how is it created? You still have to have those product descriptions for every one of your products, sure, but that's a different kind of writing.
So speaking of products, one of the things you say in your book is when you write, start with your buyers, not your products. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So I talk a lot about this idea of buyer personas. And a buyer persona is just a distinct group of people that you're targeting based on the fact that you understand who that buyer persona is. So I mentioned earlier Aaron from Rome Rig. So his buyer persona, the person he's trying to reach, is somebody like me, someone who's got the disposable income to spend to upgrade their camper van to have the best electrical system. He's not interested in somebody other than a very unique kind of buyer persona. Over my left shoulder here is a Grain surfboard. And I bought it via e-commerce. I was reading a surfing magazine that I love to surf. I'm not very good at it, but I love it. And it talked about wooden surfboards. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I'm into sustainability. I'm actually a big donor to a 12,000 acre nature preserve I'm on the board of in Panama, the country. So I need to think about my footprint in terms of my carbon. I fly on planes a lot, as well as the wastefulness of the things that I consume in my life. And a big ass surfboard using the regular techniques is a landfill problem. So anyway, I said, oh, interesting. Wooden surfboards. That's ticking my buttons. They're beautiful. They're interesting. They're sustainable. They're built using a natural material that I love. I like wood. And so I'm going to check out wooden surfboards. So I typed in wooden surfboards into Google. Bang, Grain surfboards pops up. That's cool. I could have bought a surfboard using their e-commerce engine, but I didn't, because I found, again, through their content, they were talking about how they build these boards. So they invented the way these boards are built. They're actually a boat building technique. It's got ribs in it. Mm-hmm. And then laid over the top of the ribs is other wood. And then I'm not going to pick it up. I don't want to drop it in the middle of our episode. But on the bottom there's a plug made out of Gore-Tex, which allows air to come in and out, but not water. And so that's important, because if this board is sitting on a beach in the sun can cause a differential in both humidity and the heat inside and outside of the surfboard. And if it doesn't have a way to escape, the surfboard could explode. I don't mean explode like a bomb with shrapnel going everywhere, but it could delaminate, and all of a sudden it's no good because the water would get in. So so they invented that. They invented that technique, a boat building technique with a Gore-Tex plug. And so their website was this great content on how this surfboard is built. They didn't keep it as a trade secret. Many companies would say, oh, we're not going to tell you how we do it. But they said, hey, here you go. You want the plans? We'll sell you the plans for $100 to make it yourself. But then what got me interested in is they had make your own surfboard at our factory. Ooh, that's interesting. And it turns out they're only an hour away from me. It's in York, Maine. I live in the Boston suburbs. It was a very, 1 hour drive away. So I signed up via e-commerce, literally the very first time I hit their website, for their 4-day build your own surfboard class. I actually ended up building 2. This board is my, it's never been ridden. It lives here. It's my, oh my God, I built it. I can't possibly put wax on it and ride it.
Right.
I've got a vacation house at a surfing spot. So I've got another board that I built that I use every time I surf there, which is great. So I can't even remember what your question. Oh, buyer personas. So I always hire a persona, someone who is really interested in, well, first of all, surfing, and also who's interested in sustainability, who likes the idea of a wooden surfboard, and furthermore, someone who thinks it's cool to actually use their own hands to build a surfboard. Not very many people in that universe. Maybe there's a few thousand or maybe 10,000 people. But if you target your content specifically at that buyer persona, bang, that's who you're going to end up reaching. And most people don't. Most e-commerce companies, most websites are kind of generic. Here's what our product does. But a buyer persona perspective says, oh, we're going to create great content for people who want the best electrical system for their camper van, or we're going to create content for the people who believe in sustainability and beauty in a naturally built, perhaps by their own hands, wooden surfboard.
Love it. Great example.
Yeah, right there behind you.
Right there, right here.
Could you?
And that wasn't scripted, by the way. That was just part of the conversation.
No, I mean it's I have the surfboard behind me all the time just because I think it's beautiful. It's better than just a plain wall.
Yeah, I think you got to take pride in what you make, right?
Exactly right.
So, David, you have a concept called the long tail of PR. Could you explain what that means and how that's relevant to the conversation, specifically e-commerce and content strategy?
So we the idea of the long tail originally was articulated by Chris Anderson in a book by that title, The Long Tail, and the long tail is essential for people in e-commerce to understand, because originally, prior to the web, so let's say from 1995 and earlier, my line in the sand for the web is 1995. That's when Netscape went public. 1995, there were about 20 million people on the web. I was one of them. I was pretty early, and now it's probably every human essentially. But in 1994 and earlier, you really didn't have much of an option to buy a product or service other than to go to a physical store. I mean, there were other minor options, catalogs and whatnot, but really it was about going to a store or buying a specialty catalog of some, print catalog of some kind. What the web allowed, and the first company that really exploited that was Amazon, was the idea of huge numbers of products, way more than that could ever be available in a physical store or a print catalog. So think about books. The average bookstore, I knew the numbers at one point. Let's call it 10,000 books. 10,000 different titles can be in a large bookstore. However, Amazon can have millions of titles. The long tail is the idea that that our culture has been hit driven, only a small number of large selling items until web and e-commerce allowed for the idea of the long tail. So maybe there are only 10 toothpaste brands, Crest and Colgate and whatever. But with the availability of being able to speak, because of the 11th one will never get in the stores. But with the availability of the internet and e-commerce, all of a sudden you can have 500 different toothpaste brands or whatever the product or service category is. You can have wooden surfboards that you can make yourself. Any of these products or services. So when you're thinking about how to market an e-commerce product, this is not in the same category as a regular surfboard that's made by a regular surfboard manufacturer. They're completely different. This is a long tail kind of product or service. Same thing with battery systems for a camper van. Same thing with many, many, many other products or services. So don't think that you want to sell into the big mainstream unless you happen to have a mainstream product. Think about what is the niche that you're selling into and how do you create content just for that particular long tail niche. And it makes your marketing come alive. It makes your content come alive. It makes your website and your e-commerce platform come alive because you're not focusing on the entire world. I can't tell you how many people, when I speak with them and I say, who's your target market? And they say, oh, anybody can buy my product. Well, of course, anyone can buy your product, but who's your target market? That's what we need to know. And that's the idea of understanding the micro niche, the long tail, the buyer persona that you're trying to reach.
And in that book, the author said, there's riches in the niches, right? That's one of his famous. And one of his examples was talking about music. And I know you're a music aficionado. Yep. Talking about records and niche music genres. And you can create riches in those niches because you can charge a premium. It's a lower volume, but a higher premium because everybody doesn't sell it. You don't have lots of competition. That was a
right.
Book.
Right. And so a record store might be able to stock, I'll use the 10,000 number again, 10,000 different artists, but there's millions of artists on Spotify. Huge difference.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the journalism versus marketer content for a minute, because I think that's a really interesting topic. As a marketer, I want to write sales copy, right?
Yeah.
Like that's my go-to, and it's hard to get out of that box. So when we talk about content online, because there's you can buy cheap content. You can go get writers that can write an article for $10. AI is becoming popular.
AI can be
content.
Yeah.
So can you give us some ideas of like what kind of content do we really need to write to be successful online versus just buying cheap content or AI?
There is so much horrible content out there because ChatGPT and other AI engines, you can push the button and it cranks crap out for you. And it's getting better, but it's still, the way that and I'm on the board of several AI companies, so I know this stuff pretty well, but the way these large language model AI engines work is they're simply predicting the next word in a word string. So if you were to say to it, write me an article about electrical systems in camper vans, it would go in and take a look at everything that's ever been written about this topic and create a super generic, super boring, super predictable article. And that's what, unfortunately, that's what many, many, many companies are using. That's what some e-commerce companies are doing. That's what a lot of people and organizations are doing to create content. And, it's like that game of telephone, that kids play. You whisper something in someone's ear and then they whisper it in the next person's ear. And then all of a sudden it goes all the way around the circle and the thing that comes out is completely different. With AI, there's so much AI generated content. So imagine now the large language models are using AI generated content to create more AI generated content. And so I'm a huge believer in the word perspective, an elegant turn of phrase of truly understanding an audience and creating something of value to them, of a unique perspective on a topic that comes from a human who has experience and who applies their creativity to the task. As we're recording this, only a couple of days ago, my friend Bill Walton died. Bill is NBA basketball Hall of Famer. He wrote the book to my book. He wrote the foreword to my book, Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead.
Saw a picture of him on a post you just did the other day.
Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. Bill wrote the foreword. So I decided to write a little story about Bill. He's my buddy. I've spent time with him, had dinner with him a couple of times. I know his wife, Lori. So I wrote a story that came from my heart about my friend who passed away. Could I have gone to AI and said, write a story about Bill Walton and put it up on my blog? Sure. But that wouldn't have been the same as the creativity and the personal experience that I used to write a little remembrance of my friend who passed away a couple of days ago, as we were recording this a couple of days ago. And so I think that's important when it comes to any website, any social media content is you can, and there's great uses of AI. AI is great for summarization. AI is great for transcription of audio content. Taking, for example, the audio of this podcast, using an AI engine to transcribe it into text. Great. Some fabulous uses of AI around different aspects of content generation. However, using it to write content without applying creativity and a unique perspective and an understanding of buyer personas, that's not a good use of AI.
Makes sense. I think that's where journalism can come in, like you said, right?
Yeah. So a journalist is someone who understands how to do all those things, who has made a living doing those things. In some cases, have gone to journalism school to understand how to do that.
Yeah, so true. And like you said, great at storytelling and great at looking at all the angles and even taking a contrarian position. And there's nothing like a good journalistic story versus a marketing copy. Right. Well, before we run out of time, we know we're on a tight time frame here, David, but we have a traditional, what we call the $1 million question.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So our $1 million question is always the last question we ask at the end of our shows. And we wanted to ask you if there are one thing that you recommend an e-commerce company do today to be successful and grow their business. What would that one thing be?
Build fans of your business. So that's a kind of a broad answer, but the things we've been talking about today, all of them, what they end up doing is building fans of your business. If you understand the people you're trying to reach really, really well, if you create great content that educates and informs them, if you give them something with no expectations of anything in return, those are, and there's others, but those are elements of building fans. And once you have fans, they come back again and again. They share that they're a fan with others, the way that I shared that I'm a fan of Grain Surfboards or Rome Rig, the camper van electrical company. And a fan is someone who will purchase again and again and again. Simply someone who buys your product because it's cheapest, they don't become a fan. So building fans would be the way I would encourage people to be successful.
Fantastic. That's great words of wisdom. And it completely makes sense because we're all humans and we like to deal with people we know, like, and trust. And creating fans, and especially raving fans in a community and a culture and a tribe really makes sense because that's what people want to relate to. Just like your surfboard story and your RV battery story, you trust those companies, you have a relationship with those companies, and that really, really makes sense. So we wanted to thank you for joining us. I wanted to thank our special guest, David Meerman Scott, for sharing his vast knowledge and insights with us, decades and decades of experience. Like I said in the beginning, he's been a hero of mine for a long time, and really excited to have him here finally. And if you don't have David's book, The New Rules of Marketing and PR, it's an absolute must read. Go get it, read it, really read it. There are just so many nuggets of great information, resources, and insights there. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please share them, and please subscribe and share our show as well. And
yeah, we're going to have you on again, David, because I know we just barely cracked the surface, but that was such a good podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's fun. It's fun for me too. So thanks for having me on.
We really appreciate it. And look forward to seeing everybody next time. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.